So I'm delighted to be here with Guy Ware, who is the author of 24 Hours, You Have 24 Hours to Love Us, and The Fat of Fed Beasts, as many other short stories that have been in various different collections. And we're here sitting where you write. The Fat of Fed Beasts came out this April, and it has had the most amazing reviews. You've been compared to some really big names: Beckett, Stern, Kafka. I said Krasner Hawkeye. How does that feel?
Brilliant, I think. In one way, it's a double-edged sword. In that, I know. I had a conversation with a colleague at work because I was deeply chuffed by particularly the review in the Guardian, the Nicholas
Yeah.
one. And to the extent where I don't usually do this, but I kind of emailed it to loads of people and said, "Look, I'm showing off."
Why not? It was an amazing review.
And a colleague of mine read it and said, "I can see that's meant to be a very good review, but it's exactly the kind of book that I'm not going to read. It's far too intimidating."
Wow.
And I don't think that's true, but I can see what she meant. That review in particular, it was really. Obviously, I was pleased to get it because it was very, very positive. But more than that, it not just it was saying, it was a good book, and he kicked it off by saying something about how every now and then a book comes along that feels like it's been kind of reverse engineered for his taste, and then did the rest of the review. And what I felt like was he had sat here and looked at my bookshelves because of the kind of accuracy of the allusion and the references.
That's really nice.
It's really good, and that just made me think this guy has understood and has really got this, which is great, and it was really, really encouraging.
Well, and also perhaps that in fact there is some truth in those comparisons, that you are in some way just channeling those authors. You are influenced by them. They're not just names that have been kind of plucked from a shelf.
Yes, I think that's true. As I said, it was all stuff that I had read and perhaps stored away. How conscious it was is another matter.
Yeah.
There was certainly some conscious Beckett in there. It was part of the joy of it in a way was taking a crime thriller, bank robbery, and getting to a man stuck alone in a basement, pondering.
Which actually, it's kind of your favourite thing in a way. I think that's a theme that runs through your work, that you enjoy isolating people. You like to see how they work, kind of almost an individual against the world, against some kind of big bureaucratic machine, and there they are. Fighting against. There's a bit. I'm not saying you do that all the time, but there's definitely something that you enjoy. This person standing against, or not even against, but just somehow alone from the rest of society.
Maybe I don't talk to people enough.
I don't believe that.
A lot of my stories and the Fat of Fed Beasts are about work. Interestingly to me.
Yeah.
And I have spent a long time, several decades, being a civil servant and a local government employee and various things related to that kind of work. So a lot of time spent working in large organisations. And some of the time I hate them, and some of the time I think they're absolutely fascinating. And clearly at some level I am addicted to it because I've been doing it for 30 years. But it does mean that, what is in the forefront of my mind when I am writing is quite often that relationship between the individual and the environment, in that case an organisation that he or she's working in. And the way, I've been very interested over the years about the way that forms people, turns them into who they are, in ways that don't often, frequently don't read about or write about. it's, I don't know, we all spend more time working than we do pretty much anything else. And, the idea that that doesn't have at least as much effect on who we are and how we think as, the people we fall in love with or our parents or,
but it's
anybody
interesting
else.
because it is an extension, isn't it, of society as a whole. I think that organisations, although they're particular, each has its own quirks, there is a sense in which they are a kind of extension of the social environment and political environment, and that I get that feeling from reading your work, that you're aware of that, and how an individual interacts with that and how they're shaped by that smaller, the environment just keeps on getting bigger, but it's all in a way part of that same thing of where you live and what's expected of you, and how that shapes your development.
Yes, and in ways that that you're not necessarily conscious of, but it's not just a kind of career development. It's the way that you think and the way that you react to the world is, inevitably it's determined by something that you spend hours and hours and hours of your life doing.
Yeah.
And the I've written a lot, I think, about where that sort of goes slightly pear-shaped.
Yeah.
So there's a story in the Desperate Remedies anthology about a civil servant who is so pissed off with that working environment that he gets addicted to getting himself beaten up, which is a kind of fairly extreme reaction.
Yeah.
You might think, but it's a kind of, it's a way of taking himself out of all thought about anything else in the way that somebody else might become an alcoholic or whatever. It's it's so overwhelming as an experience, it drowns out.
Well, I suppose also
everything
it's
else.
like the reverse side of the kind of civilized being, isn't it? It's raw humanity. It's taking you right back down to being a sort of bestial, breathing, soil grubbing individual.
Yeah, except that it's not like he's competing or wanting to win fights. It's like he's going out in order to get hurt.
It's really interesting because actually it's something, now you've reminded me of that story, it's made me think about how there's a lot of female narratives about pain and the use of pain as a way of reawakening a sense of identity. That to feel physical pain is to remind you that you are alive. I mean, there's a lot of that in other things as well. I'm thinking even American Psycho and stuff like that. But I wonder why it is that, your characters seem to feel that they might want something to take them out of themselves in a way, or to take them out of that kind of buffeted, safe sort of, office environment where there's always a cup of tea and a lot of irritation.
Because I guess at some level everybody does.
Yeah.
I hope what I'm not writing is, little man ground down by the tedium of the 9 to 5 breaks out at the weekend.
It doesn't feel like
there's
that.
an element of that, but it's, I hope there's something a little more complex.
Yes, it feels more challenging than that.
Because, I said myself a moment ago, if that was what I really felt about the kind of work that I do, I wouldn't be doing it 30 years later.
Yeah.
And, so at some level there's a, there are positives in there. Obviously there are material benefits, but there are, it's more than that. It's that, the way organisations work and the things that they do, the kind of organisations I work for, they do good stuff. And the people who run them are endlessly fascinating to a writer because the psychology is, it's there being played out in front of you in interesting ways.
So how do you reconcile the being a writer and the being in a sort of ordinary 9 to 5 job? Well, probably not 9 to 5, but you get the idea. Because being a writer, if you're practicing that on a regular basis, are you not then shaping yourself in a different way, the way you look at the world? I mean, how do they work together for you?
It comes and goes, to be honest. There have been times recently where, I mean, for a long time I worked part-time, and it gave me the ability to carve out more time. You know, it's a huge luxury, you know, for me to be able to do that. You know, most people who are writing are working full-time because they need to. But I managed to carve out a part-time career for about 12 years, which gave me a couple of days a week or whatever, which gives you enough, if you're lucky, headspace to do it. But not always. I have other things like children and such like that fill my time. More recently I've been working full-time, and it has been very full-time. And the odd thing is that coincided with Fed Beasts coming out, and a lot of people said to me, "Oh, how on earth can you know, I was acting chief exec at Lambeth at the time. How on earth can you do a job like that and doing this?" Well, the short answer is the book had been sent to the publishers 18 months before it came out, and for a year and a half before that, I'd just been editing, and I'd been doing that, you know, kind of sat in a pub once or twice a week stuff. The real writing labour had happened quite a long time ago. So although the stuff was appearing while I was working very full time, I wasn't doing a great deal of new original writing at that point. And what I've now done is gone back to working part time again, because I know that there was just not going to be enough time to think. It's not just the writing stuff. It's if you're doing a demanding job, then I find that that's what I think about.
Yeah.
So I was saying earlier about, you know, the job shapes people, work shapes people. Well, it fills your head, and I just was not doing enough of not being at work to make, you know, serious new writing possible. So
you're writing now?
I am, and that was sort of wasn't quite as black and white as that. I shouldn't say this because this will jinx it, but I have a draft of the next novel drafted.
Wow.
But that's a long story in itself. It needs loads and loads of work, and that's part of the equation was it wasn't going to get loads and loads of work while I was doing the job that I was doing.
And you've been published by some great independents. How do you feel about that? I mean, obviously, in a way, you've had enough success now potentially to say, "Oh, goodbye to an independent."
I don't know. Salt, who published Fed Beasts, wave for the camera. You know, they are a really good organisation.
Yeah, I think they're fantastic.
And you know, they're two people and some support, and they do a great job. They were really nice to me. Obviously, they published my book, but they are independent. But they've managed to. You know, one of the reasons I was happy to work with them is that, you know, they've managed to garner recently, for other writers clearly more successful than I am, you know, a good deal of publicity.
Yeah.
Booker nominations.
Well, there's many discussions at the moment in the industry that in fact independents in a way are leading the publishing world now, because they understand the modern world better than sort of traditional publishers. Plus, they're prepared to take more risks and take on more books that actually people are interested in reading, rather than just a kind of formulaic, you know, or a beach read.
I think that's true, and certainly Salt's approach was, you know, tell us what the book is you've got, and, you know, why we should be interested. You know, which could have been, you know, because it's a bit like the last bestseller, and they would probably not have been interested in that as a submission. You know, they are able to take some risk. The flip side, of course, is that they don't have the marketing muscle, and so they might be publishing some very interesting books, but there's a constant battle to get those books into bookshops.
That's true, although interestingly, I know some writers who would argue that being with a large publisher can also have its downsides, in the sense that they might not be prepared to spend as much time with you. So even though they've got access to the marketing funds, they won't necessarily
spend
use
them on
for
you.
you.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's true. But I mean, it is eye-opening. We talked about the reviews earlier. And there haven't been a huge number of them, but those that have been really gratifyingly positive. But it was a bit of an eye-opener that you get your book reviewed as a pick of the week in The Guardian. That is not enough to raise it up the point where Waterstones will stock it.
I know.
And
I mean, that's just lack of foresight on their part. I think sometimes the thing about a book that's come out independently is it just takes a little bit more time. I think a good book, in my opinion and my hope, always rises to the surface. And yours is a good book.
Thank you.
So, I wanted to ask you also, because you write short fiction and now novels. Do you find them a very different medium, or do you think, in a way, one is just a longer version of the other? Well,
I do know what you mean.
Battle over this.
And no, I don't, I think is the short answer. But the interesting, to me, one of the interesting things about Fat of Fed Beasts, and why, which is not my first novel, it's the first novel
I did wonder about that.
Sent off to a publisher's. But there are several other more or less complete, stroke incomplete, novels sat in the drawer that are going to stay there. And one of the reasons, I'll get back to why I think they are different, but one of the reasons I think I got this one to a state where I was happy with it, and it hadn't kind of run out of steam by the time I'd written it, was the four narrators aspect to its structure, four separate narrators, which is great as a writer, because you can, when you get bored with somebody or a bit stuck, you kind of put that one aside and say, I'll do a bit in somebody else's voice. And of the four, it's quite interesting. Dimitri, who's the most oafish and possibly least sympathetic. I don't know, I'm interested in your view of that, but certainly not a hugely sympathetic character. Has a much bigger share of the final novel than I'd ever thought he would, because it was fun to write, and it kind of took the brakes off a bit in different ways. The principal narrator, I suppose, although they're fairly equal, has this kind of unbelievably pedantic, finicky style, which is also great fun to write, but you've got to be really, really careful. It's very easy to overdo, and it is boring, and you need to be careful not to bore readers, and it's getting that balance right is quite hard. Whereas Dimitri, I could kind of let the brakes off and swear a lot, and it was cheer me up a bit, so it kind of kept the energy going a bit. But coming back to your question, so why isn't that a collection of short stories? I find anyway, I broadly know not exactly how long a story is going to be when I start it, but whether it is a story or something longer.
Yeah.
David Foster Waller is called A Long Thing. And it's because I think a lot of what I do is, when I'm trying to make a story, or indeed a novel, one thing is never enough. It doesn't have enough an idea. Just trying to think of a counterexample, but I won't, and just confuse me. An idea is never enough to sustain a story. And what I need is, I will start writing, I'll get an idea, I'll get a voice or a situation or whatever, and I'll start writing, and well, it's fine, but where's the story? And I need at least two kind of conflicting things, that what you're doing in the story is working out how those things fit together and maintaining the tension between them. So classic example for me, the first story in the collection, Witness Protection, is a story of well, either it's a story of a man who's had a mental breakdown and is returning to his wife and his family home, or it's the story of a man who has witnessed a police killing and is in a form of witness protection. And the answer is it's both. But it's, you know, how long can you maintain that tension between those two ideas? You can maintain it for 20 minutes or so. You can't maintain it for 200 pages. It would get dull. You know, so it is a story form that I could see would hold in that way. I think in short stories you can do that. You can hold those kind of two conflicting ideas, or more if you're lucky, for a period, and you know the point of the story is how do you hold that? Do you resolve them? Don't you? But you know, the story comes together when they clash. I think in a novel, as I said, certainly it's, you know, there's got to be again something more than that. You can't simply hold that tension. But what I did in Fat of Fed Beasts, I think, is probably kind of move that onto the level of the structure of the book itself. So there's a tension in there between, you talked about Becky a bit earlier, there's a tension there between the idea of these narrators, particularly Rada, but the others as well, who are kind of intensely interior focused and analytical of what, not Dimitri, but Rada certainly. And I guess even Dimitri in his own way, he's pondering how stupid the rest of the world is and how much he would like to punch them, or whatever it might be. But they're, you know, at every stage what they're doing is kind of, you know, interrogating themselves or their situation, and combining that with what is on the face of it a crime thriller. Of an odd sort, but nonetheless, you know, there is a bank robbery in the second chapter, and there are murders and blood all over the place, and so bringing those two together is a kind of structural equivalent of what I was saying about the short story. I think that allows it to last in that case.
And different voices conflicting against each other are quite. I like that as well, aren't they? Have different points of view.
Again, going back to the four narrators, it was a way, you know, slightly facetious about, I can turn to the next one when I'm bored, but it's also a way of maintaining that difference and different perspectives on the same, different analyses of the same incidents and so on. You know, and that could not be a short story, I don't think. It needs that time and space to develop and work out over a bit more, not as much as I originally wrote, but but a bit more acreage of paper.
So you're working on a draft of a novel now, and you're writing some short stories.
Hadn't done a lot of stories while I was working on Fat Fed Beasts, but wanted to get back to it. Have just been away on holiday, and that quite often. It's that headspace thing again. I go on holiday, I usually write a fair amount, or try to, and so maybe there's a collection in there of kind of postcard stories. There's a number of stories I've written over the years that have been triggered by family holidays, which
sounds interesting.
Yes, not sure what the family would think about that.
And my final thing really is, if someone was coming to your work for the first time, I should just quickly add, I could keep talking to you, but I probably would stop. If they're coming to your work for the first time, what would you recommend they start with? Where would you start if you're going to read some Guy Ware?
Well, yes, it's a slightly embarrassing question because it's not like I've got, you know, a shelf full of.
I don't know. You've got two books that are completely your own, and you have others where you know, substantial collections of stories and various different publications. So
yes, well, where would I recommend you? If you're the kind of person who thinks they don't like short stories, and I have met you, you have explained to me why that's the case. Then obviously start with Fat of Fed Beasts. I need the sounds. I think if you want a taste of the short stories. Witness Protection, I've already mentioned, is one of my favourites still. I hesitate to say that because I wrote it quite a long time ago and it's been in a couple of books. All Downhill From Here. Try that one. It's an interesting little, it's going to sound poncy, jeu d'esprit, but again based on that thing about two separate ideas, partly triggered by, it's a story of the flood, sort of, and partly triggered, and Noah and the Ark and so on, triggered by reading to my daughter one day and discovering that whales evolved from land animals, things a bit like wolves, which, when you know it, kind of doesn't seem quite so bizarre, but actually when you first realise it, it kind of explains why they're mammals apart from anything else.
Yeah, and the idea of the finger bones stretching out when you see their skeletons.
So that was kind of an interesting way into, you know, in the story there's a pair of wolves at the time of the flood, and one of them gets on the ark and the other doesn't. So it's quite fun.
And we have spent quite a lot of time talking about plots and you know, where your ideas come from, but I should also point out that your language is lovely. And before we started talking to each other, I read out just one little bit, which I'm going to do again because it struck me this morning and it's nice. And then, you know, it was almost raining again now. The damp air was soft, the light opaque, directionless. The fields looked larger than usual, flatter, deprived of any shadows. Sheep grazed listlessly. So, please read some Guy Ware. Thank you very much for agreeing to chat with me. And yeah, I hope to do another interview with Melissa Bailey in the next few months. So thank you, Guy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.